and this section here, I'm glad it's in this particular study. But almost any sin and all sin are connected with other sins. And it's hard to, I'm not saying it's not possible, it probably is, but it's very difficult, I'll put it that way, to just commit one sin, such as laziness or slothfulness. There are other things that are associated with it as well. So as we look at this particular section, we're going to see how, and he uses an idle mind as the devil's workshop here. We're going to see how that works, and how that it contributes to the sin of laziness or another type of sin. So as we look at this particular section, there are 4 points that we want to look at, and all of them have to do with things associated with the types of or laziness, or the types of sin that that we might commit. In 1 Timothy 5 and verse 13, which is the first of the verses that is listed under this heading, there was a time when, in this particular section here, when Paul was writing to Timothy, and he was talking about the older men, the older women, and so on, and he gets to the younger widows, and he addresses these younger widows. And he says concerning these younger widows in 5 and verse 13, and besides, they learn to be idle. He said it would be better for them, of course, not to be single or not to be younger widows. He says they learn to be idle. They wander about from house to house, and not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things which they ought not. Now, what Paul's pointing out here is, is that the mind of these, or the lives of these young widows, who doesn't have a husband, that there are other things that they engage in to sort of take up their time, or their responsibilities is not as great. I don't know how to be the best way to point that out, but he says concerning them, what they're doing is they're following other things, such as they're becoming idle. When they become idle, then they begin to go from house to house, and they pick up tales and they share tales, and so on. So an idle mind is the devil's workshop. And so he is pointing out to these young widows here that they need to be careful in what they're doing, and that their time shouldn't be consumed in other sins, other things. Not anything wrong with visiting someone as a young widow. There's not anything wrong with trying to help or encourage. But Paul says in this particular instance, guard against this. Don't take things in your own control and gossip and be so idle that you just go from house to house and you're saying things which you ought not. And so that is a good admonition to see here concerning laziness. Now, I don't know that Paul here is saying just this, but when she's married, she has a responsibility. When she has children, she has a responsibility to those children and to that marriage. So it seems to me that Paul's pointing out here in 5 and verse 13 that it would be better for them not to waste their time, not to waste their life on busy things, frivolous things. He is suggesting to them that they find here something profitable, good, and right to do. There's no profit in idleness. There's no profit in gossiping. There's no profit in tale-bearing. As a matter of fact, these things are condemned. So when Paul here, as he's writing to these particular church members, he he begins in verse 11 and says, as he talks about the older widows and says, they're well reported and so on, and of course don't let the church be burdened with that. But I want to pick up the reading at verse 11. He says, for their care, he says, but refuse the younger widows, for when they begun to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry, having condemnation, because they have cast off their first faith. And besides, they learn to be idle, wandering from house to house, not only idle, but also gossips and busybodies, saying things that they ought not. Now notice verse 14. Therefore, I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, and give no opportunity for the adversary to speak reproachfully. This shows us that sometimes responsibility that is removed from us, taken either by our choice or something else, that we replace it with the wrong things. We replace it with the wrong things. For example, if we retire from a job, and I would imagine it's a different set of responsibilities, a different mindset, and you don't get up at a certain time, you don't have to be there 9 to 5 or whatever. What do we fill that time with? Do we fill it with good works, or do we fill it with frivolous things? Sinful things. And that's what Paul here is saying. He says this is a curse of laziness, is when there's not an accurate accounting of a person's self to God in all things, rather than the person is doing what they want to, which is sinful and wrong. And through the years, I know of several different situations where this has become the case. Christians have something amiss in their life that they don't want to deal with or whatever. And what happens then is, rather than be faithful to God, they take up talebearing. They take up idleness, carrying tales from house to house, and so on. So that's the first point that we need to understand, and that it paves the way for additional sins. Also, in letter B, and it's a little bit late here. We didn't cover these, did we? That you remember? Okay. Point B, it makes room in a person's life. Laziness makes room in a person's life for discontent and complaints, just like the one-talent man. Now, we studied this just the other day. He was given 1 talent. He comes back and he brings that 1 talent, and he actually maligns his master. I don't know that this was ever mentioned other than from the 1-talent man. I'm sure that being represented in this story, represented as the master is Christ. But he comes back and he says, I knew you was a hard man. I think this was his feelings. I don't think the Lord ever presented himself to this person. I believe it was his outlook on things. You're a hard person. They were told to take it and use it, and then, of course, come back or bring it back with usury. And he says, I knew you're a hard man. Many times you required of us things that we were not told to do. Reaping where you had not sown. You never give us instructions on this. That's not true. And gathering where you have not scattered seed. How can something grow when the seed has never been scattered? You should have scattered the seed so that we can go. No, that wasn't what was said. He was to take the 1 talent. So, where he took that 1 talent and he was lazy, his discontentment led him to a false conclusion concerning the master. He says, I knew you was a hard man. That's the only one I might say, well, he did tell you to use it and bring it back. But I don't believe the words here, hard man, means that he's asking beyond what a person can do. So in all of this, his discontentment brought him to the point that he comes back and he says, Lord, I've got that one talent that you gave me. I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't sure what you wanted me to do. You didn't provide any information, which on the question here of information and instruction, the other two understood clearly what they needed to do. He was given the same instruction as they were. And so his discontentment led him to being this lazy servant. Here's what you gave me, and here's what I have. Didn't you use it? Didn't you gain any profit by it? The other two did. And so I see that it's quite empty for him to say, well, you didn't tell me what I need to do. And that's the way sometimes lazy people are. Lazy people are. Now, it might be that you'd have to tell a person more than once what the instructions are. I'm not against that. Not against that at all. Sometimes it just takes sometimes for things to sink in on me really good. I'm not against that at all. But he had to hear enough that he should have behaved like the other two. So, when we look at how discontent here comes to that of complaints, that's like somebody coming and saying, you know what, I can't sit on these seats. They do hurt my back and probably hurt yours. I can't sit on these seats for worship, so I'm going to stay home. Most of the time, there's another problem. It's not these seats. It's not these seats. These little folding chairs that look like they got 4 or 5 little sticks and they just fold up into a handful about that big. I sit in them sometimes. They're not very comfortable, but I still sit in them. It's not going to keep me from going to a wiener roast or whatever we might have. But see, if I start complaining about those chairs, it may be something else. That's what generally happens. Oh, these lights here make me dizzy. What, do you go to a doctor's office? Yeah. Do you go to a gymnasium? Yeah. Some of them have the same lights as we do, these whatever, I can't remember what, incandescent, anyway. Whatever these lights are. Oh, they flicker and I can't stand that. There's another problem. And the problem is discontentment. Discontentment. Now, look at the next point here. It leads to a mental and a spiritual collapse. I don't know if you have ever known somebody like this, but surely you have seen somebody like this. Ecclesiastes 10 and verse 18, because of laziness, the building decays. And through idleness of hands, the house leaks. You know why? If we go home tonight, and I hope nobody has this problem, we go home tonight and there's a leak in the roof somewhere. We don't just sit there and say, well, you know what, our roof's leaking now, and we may as well make the best of it. When it quits raining, it ain't gonna leak no more. No, as soon as we can, we try to fix that leak, don't we? The lazy person, what the lazy person does is they create the leaks by letting the building decay, and then when it leaks, it's through his idleness that he didn't do what he should have done at first. Now you see how laziness contributes to that? I tell you something that's a real reminder for me is mowing the grass. You look at it, you know it's a little bit high. You know, up around your ankles ain't too bad. So you don't mow, you decide to wait. put it off. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. Next thing you know, it's way above your ankles. And through your idleness, the grass gets really high. And then you have to work twice as hard to cut the grass, or you let it go right on up to the windows. You see some of these abandoned houses around here? There's weeds up to the windows on some of them, and some of them even higher. I saw one the other day where there was a tree growing out of it. Good-sized tree. I mean, that's how long it had been, whatever, in ruin. Nobody was living in it. But here's the point. It leads to a spiritual collapse. Laziness, now we're not talking in the sense of a physical house now. Let's talk about our spiritual house. If we can neglect our spiritual house, and it begins to run down, and it begins to become weak, and comparative to a leak, we begin to have problems, and we begin to sin, and things begin to stack up on us, and so on. It leads to a spiritual collapse. And the reason is not that God causes that to happen. Not that. The individual causes it to happen. It's the individual who says, well, I know this needs to be done, and somebody needs this, or somebody needs that, or they need encouragement, or whatever. But we allow ourselves to go into spiritual collapse. Spiritual collapse is when we completely and totally leave God, even in our own mind. And one other thing I'm going to add to this, which he doesn't. It causes us to blame others. It causes us to blame others. And that shouldn't be. I don't know at the times I've heard in however long I've been preaching. I'm not going to come up there anymore because of so-and-so. Even said of me, because of you. I'm not going to come up there anymore because of you. Because this happened. Things you don't even realize that happened. I'm not going to come up there anymore. If he goes up there. Hey, if he's doing his best, are you doing your best? So it comes right down to a blame game. Heard a fellow one time, and the lesson that he taught was, if you come to church with a chip on your shoulder, or come to a meeting with a chip on your shoulder, you're going to find something to complain about before you leave. That's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's just the way people are. So laziness contributes to mental and spiritual collapse. Look at point number D. It also leads to being a beggar. Being a beggar. A little sleep, he says, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. That sounds good, doesn't it? At the right time. When it's appropriate. Look at verse 11. So shall your poverty come on you like a prowler. The lazy person has big aspirations. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to, this is what I've done. This is what I'm going to do. And this is my plans for the future. And people don't realize what all I've done. Let me tell you something. When you begin to blow your own horn, you're in trouble. Number one. Number two, if you're lazy and you're not doing what you ought to do, things will pile up on you. Yes, the cupboard will be empty. You ain't going to grow a garden to have food. As a matter of fact, you're not going to do nothing. He said it's like a prowler. The lazy person is expecting everything, but nothing happens. Or he's expecting everything of others, but nothing happens. Like a prowler that comes. Or like an armed man might come upon you. You've been sitting in your house, and all of a sudden, blue lights go on in your yard. I've had that happen to me several times. I mean, immediately you go through things in your, what did I do this? Did I do that? Did I, whatever, did I run a light? Did I pass a school bus? What is it? And they may be looking for somebody else. But we need to make sure that we are not resting when we should be working. Resting when we should be working. Let's look at Proverbs 19 and verse 15. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep. A lazy person, I don't know that I could do this or not. Pam will tell you that I take a nap about every evening. Very rarely that I don't. I feel like I need it, but maybe I don't. But here's the thing. Laziness casts one into a deep sleep. It's not that they sleep 24 hours a day. Everything shuts down. They have no willpower. They have no zeal. They have no vehement desire within them to do anything. And so it's just like the slothful person who is willing to lay in the bed 24 hours a day, or one who is willing to sit in the recliner 24 hours a day. A funny thing along that line, and I'm not saying that some of us haven't stayed in the bed longer than we ought to, but one of Chan's boys, he wouldn't go to school. And every time they'd send him to school, about 9 o'clock they'd call, and Chan started trying to decide what they was going to do with their son. He didn't want to go to school. I mean, this went on up into the 2nd grade. So they decided, okay, if you don't go to school, you don't do anything, you go to bed. You stay in the bed till you want to go to school. And he loved it. That wasn't punishment for him. He loved it. He would have stayed in. I don't know how long he could have stayed in there, but he stayed in there at least a couple days. Anything was better than not going to school to him, or going to school. But we need to make sure our priorities are set so that none of this leads us to hunger and strife. And again, may I make a spiritual application of this? Some people are alive physically, and their souls are destitute. And their souls are condemned by laziness. Look at Proverbs 23 and verse 21. For the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty. We know this about the drunkard, don't we? And the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe a man with rags. Don't provide for yourself, you're not going to have. We know what happens to the glutton and the drunkard. I know some good people, you do too, that will work when they're sober, that will do anything for you when they're sober, but when they're drunk, they'll sell out their kids. Poverty, glut, and it provides them with rags. They're not even clothed properly. They don't have clothes as they need to because of laziness. Point E. It causes one to be repugnant to that of God. I'm trying to think of something here that would be very distasteful. Well, some people don't like vinegar. And the verse mentions here vinegar to the teeth and smoke it to the eyes. So is the lazy man to those who send to him. It causes us to be distasteful before God. Laziness is not approved of God. Substituting my will, which is lazy, not doing anything, for God's will doesn't work. Doesn't work. So it's just like pouring you out a glass of vinegar. And of course, I know some people that like vinegar. I'm not knocking you. There's no way I could drink a glass of vinegar. I probably wouldn't breathe for 2 or 3 minutes after I drank that. I like it in pickles. I like it in canning stuff, whatever. It's okay, but don't pour me a glass of vinegar. I just don't like it. There's some of these things that these fancy chefs that go over in these foreign lands, some of the things they drink and they cook over there, I'm not interested in those things. It just doesn't, well, it doesn't appeal to me. And it's distasteful. It's distasteful. So is the lazy person to God. They're so repugnant. It's almost as if, and I think this verse here implies this. I'm not sure how much we should just dive in and help the lazy person. I know that comes as an individual responsibility. I know that. Church has no responsibility. But it's hard to encourage a lazy person, just like it's hard to encourage a liar. If you can't trust a person's word, how can you help them? I've had several people. One come right to the church door, and he said, my children have to have medicine. And it was somebody I knew. My children has to have medicine, they're sick. Is there any way you can loan me some money? I said, how much you need? He said, $50. I said, I don't have $50. I think I had 30 in my pocket at the time. I give him that $30, and he left saying, I'll pay you back as soon as I get my payday. That's never been mentioned. You know, that's distasteful to me. Not that it hurt me. He was lying to God too. He was lying to God. So it's distasteful for people to do that to us. No doubt you've paid people to do something and they didn't show up, or they didn't do it as you wanted to. That's the way a lazy person is. They talk big, but they do nothing. Here's the conclusion. And we're not going to get into the new lesson tonight, but here's the conclusion. Paul writes in Ephesians 5 and verse 14, awake you who sleep. Now, he's not talking about a good night's rest. Arise from the dead. He's not saying go out to the cemetery and somebody's going to come out of the grave. These are all statements that has to do with the awakening of the sense of responsibility within a person. When those responsibilities are asleep, or we're slumbering, or they're dead within us, he says, wake up, and Christ will give you light. I don't like vinegar, but they gave Christ some sort of a vinegar when he was thirsty. I don't like people to hate me, but they do. But they hated Christ. You see? You see the point? So it's time. It's not that we can say, but nobody has it as bad as I've had it. No, don't say that. Don't say that. There was a boy the other day, and he was working for one of these tree companies around here, so similar to Aspelung or something like that. He walked up on the porch. He didn't expect anything. Chickens in the yard. People were very cordial. And all of a sudden, something hit him. And there was an old grumpy rooster there, and it flogged him real good. Now, he didn't like it. It was funny now. He didn't like it. Let me tell you something. We're going to be flogged. People are not going to like us. But when we're lazy, God doesn't like us. I believe you can see the point. In James 1 in verse 22 through 25. Be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. If you just hear it and you're not a doer of it, it's like you look in a mirror and you see something wrong and you just really don't care. Got mud on your face. Mud on your face. You ever handled something, and the other day I forget what I had been into, and I looked down, my hands had blue stripes on them. It's something I had lifted, a piece of wood or something. And I didn't expect that. I washed it off. Wasn't sure where it come from, but I cleaned it off. That's the way we need to be. We need to clean ourselves up. We need to look into the mirror of God's Word and see what He wants us to look like. Not me look in the mirror and say, here's what I am. What do you want me to be? What do you want me to be? And let the perfect law of liberty shape us, mold us, and bring us to the point that God then will be pleased with us. Any closing comments before we end tonight? You've listened really well. We will begin next week. I thought sure I could get through that about 15 minutes, but I didn't. But we'll begin next week with the lesson on the idea of helping and giving, and we'll study that together. Perhaps tonight you have a need to make your life right, and there's something that is sinful, something that's wrong. You understand the way to make correction for it, and we can help you with that. We can encourage you. We can lift you up. We can pray with you that God will forgive you. But first and foremost, ask God to forgive you, because all sin is against God. If we can help you, let us know as we stand and sing.